since we are a couple minutes after, I'm going to call this meeting to order of the Legislative Advocacy Committee. Do we have any, should we do a roll call first before we do? It's not on the thing.
Trustee Alton?
Okay.
Trustee Gibson?
Here.
Trustee Osterling?
And then of course we have our Senate trustee present. Public comment on non-agenda items. Do we have any public comment?
No.
Great. And then we have the minutes from May 22nd, 2023. For that meeting, only Trustee Gibson was present for that meeting, so we will, I think, accept this for now and table it until we figure out how we can improve those minutes. And then so it brings us to B1. The first item is update on state issues.
I respectfully request that we move to the next item because we're waiting for our lobbyists to log
Sounds
on
good.
to be able to talk about the state issues.
Then we'll start with the update on federal issues, B2.
From staff, the point of having this topic on the agenda today was to open for the new committee to talk about the year to come and how federal issues, how you'd like to engage with them going forward. We don't have anything to report particularly on the federal side except for the receipt of a couple of grants that came through Thursday, I think, when we got news of that. We are engaging with the local congressional offices for some event attendance coming up here. But I think really what we could do is just have a discussion about how you all would like to have the committee work with federal issues in the year to come. As you know, we have a state lobbyist that helps us engage in Sacramento pretty extensively. And I think we wanted to open it for discussion and think about how we can engage at the federal level.
Great. Trustee Gibson.
Well, it just would occur to me that we'd want to keep track, obviously, of anything at the federal level that affects community colleges. So that seems like the one thing we want to do. If something's, a bill is being considered or the president is considering some executive action that would somehow impact the students at community college or the students who owe money to community colleges like me or community colleges some kind of way. We want to know what's happening or what the rumors are or what the possibilities are, I would think.
Are any of the federal grants that you mentioned anything new compared to what we've seen in the past? Or is it just this similar type of, like I know we got like the biotech. Biotech, no. Like, is there anything that we haven't heard of before that?
Yes,
Well, go ahead.
we had a $3 million Title V grant that was for the retention of Latin A students, which we received word last week that we had that is a grant that we've already had, right?
We've had
It's a
previous Title V
renewal.
grants.
So it's a renewal. And then an $805,000 Voices in STEM grant to expand our community-based learning programs in STEM, and that came in last week as well.
And as far as new agencies are concerned, it's Department of Education, and it's pretty standard stuff. Very good for us, and we're excited about it. But it's not a new relationship, I don't think, that we've established. Yeah. And to your point, in the past, we have engaged with ACCT and other national organizations, primarily through attending conferences. Another one coming up in next month that I think Trustee Silver's attending. I know that we've gone in the past in February to their National Legislative Summit. Those are typically the ways that the colleges stay engaged at the national level. So from what you're saying, it sounds like we should kind of continue that practice, I think, going forward. Okay, good to hear.
Yeah, I understand that, a lot of, when we've been to Washington, when I was in Washington earlier this year with some of our colleagues, most of our advocacy issues were pretty much exactly what ACCT had kind of outlined. And, I think many of the issues that we have talked about and that we shared at the time with Congress members Chu and Schiff are the same things that I think we've been beating the drum about for a while, increasing access to Pell Grants, wanting more federal work-study money to be open for community colleges as compared to what it is now, things of those nature that I think we continue to look at. But I think broadly speaking that has worked for us, but I think it would be just useful to see if there are anything else that's out there that's new in the conversation that we haven't necessarily then if we have nothing else on update on federal issues, do we have our obvious?
I am seeing that he needs help getting into the Zoom, so I'm gonna troubleshoot that for you.
Great. Then in that case, let's temporarily go to B3, 2023-24 academic year activities.
Strategic advocacy.com, please. Sorry for me. Again, I think this is just room to give the committee room to talk about how they want to see the year progress. We invited the lobbyist for the associated students to attend today, just to kind of monitor and be part of the conversation, and of course Avery's kind of conduit between us and the students as well. In my position as staff support, there's coordination that happens between what the students are doing and what the trustees want to do through this committee. And I just wanted to give a chance for you all to put your heads together, to think about where you might want to go, and to think about how this, given your chairmanship where you are, what you see for the year ahead as far as it's concerned. Yeah.
I mean, I think one thing that we definitely have obviously done, either through the committee or on certain bills, we've taken positions as a college, and I know that we've done it like more from the superintendent level or to the committee level. It'd be great to also kind of set this, what y'all's legislative priorities are for this coming year, to have that kind of understanding, to see what we can bring. Would love to see the things that you all maybe would want to bring to the table for that conversation. I think part of it also that might be helpful when we hear the update on state issues is to hear where we are on. I know legislative session just ended in Sacramento for this year, but where we are on the bills that we have been tracking and looking at in the past, I think it'd be helpful. Hopefully we'll get to that in the update on state issues, but then to see what we're expecting next year. So I think that will help us how we enter the conversations for the rest of the academic year, recognizing of course that a lot of that work that we do also culminates in our lobbying trip to Sacramento at the start of the next calendar year. Do you have anything else?
What we've talked about in this committee before is CCLC. It puts together a package of what they're watching and sometimes take positions of opposing or supporting different things. So that's always great to look at when that comes out. Sometimes it's a little late, but it's always great to look at when it comes out. I also it seems like David sometimes has things for us to hear that really CCLC, it's not the exact same angle that CCLC. So that's always good to hear David's perspective on some of these things too. But CCLC website usually at some point has some oppose and support, just like they do right now. They have some positions on things that are sitting on Newsom's desk right now that they oppose and support. Just a few, 4 or 5 right now.
Yeah. So existing within that infrastructure sounds like
I think it makes sense. I think it's worked for us in the past. I think I would be interested to see. I know David's on, so we'll hear from him in a second. But if there are pieces that we want to really hammer home more this year, if we can have a more formal position from the full board, things like that, I'd be open to those kind of conversations depending on where we are going into the rest of the academic year. So, great. If there's nothing more on item B3, let's go back to B1 for the update on state issues. And I see our Sacramento representative is here, David.
Do we want to expand here?
That should be helpful.
Hi everyone,
Hi there.
Hey, how are you?
Thanks for joining us.
how are you guys doing?
Doing well. Would love an update on where things are up in Sacramento.
Sure. So I sent a slide deck. I don't know if somebody has access to put it up on the screen or if I should share my screen.
If you can share, that would be great. I can also bring it up. It'll take a minute.
Do we give them access?
It may have to come from your end. It looks like my sharing is disabled on this end.
I think we can work on that. We'll figure this out.
Perfect.
Okay, I can kind of start by prefacing, in a general sense, we ended this last legislative session about a week and a half ago, and now we start with a little bit of a lull in between now and when the next session is going to begin at the beginning of January. And just as a reiteration, Everything that was sent over to the governor's desk about a week and a half ago in terms of legislation has about 2.5 more weeks until, about 3 weeks until the governor has a deadline to ensure that he either signs, vetoes, or just allows everything to become law. So we are in a bit of a wait and see mode on legislation, but it's still very exciting. We get news every day on what is being signed, what is being vetoed, and then what is still left on the table for him to act on. This last year, as many of you are aware, we had a pretty down budget year. Economically, we had to overcome about a $37 billion revenue shortfall. The governor made a significant number, and you'll see it in the slides, but I'll get a little bit ahead of that. The governor had to make, and the legislature had to agree with a certain number of budget cuts, delays, reductions, and accounting mechanisms to make up that $37 billion shortfall. A number of those came in the form of delays or cuts to one-time programmatic funding. As you're aware, in our 2022-2023 budget, we had a very fortuitous budget, very fruitful, and we were able to spread around a lot of additional one-time money. So that's a lot of the money that was ultimately either cut or delayed. Oh, thank you. Awesome. Once again, a total of $226 billion in spending. I'm just going to really quickly run through the budget, just because, we kind of dispensed with this a few months ago, and I think that the more pressing issues right now are in terms of legislation. Not much really changed between my last presentation back in May or June and what was ultimately adopted in July. So we did have a slight uptick in Proposition 98. It came in $108 billion for total K-14 spending. The cost of living adjustment, COLA, stayed relatively the same through the May revision from our last meeting. And we're still in a test one operative year. So budget reserves relatively stayed the same as well. The only difference really is the safety net reserve went from $450 million up to $900 million. Though generally, education does not see any of that money when the state has to dip into it. The public school stabilization account, otherwise known as Prop 98 reserve, went up about $100 million to the statutory maximum. So once again, the PSSA or Prop 2 or Prop 98 reserve, it does hit that 10% constitutional limit. So unless we either increase Prop 98 next year or dip into that reserve, it will stay at that amount for any time to come. So a couple of major spending proposals. The apportionment COLA did not change at all from the May revision. It remained at $678 million. Categorical COLA changed slightly. It increased about $10 to $15 million just because we added in a couple of other additional categorical programs to the COLA, but all the core programs remained the same. The only new thing that we did see in the final budget act was a $60 million nursing program support, and we're going to get more detail on how that money is going to be allocated out by the Chancellor's office in the coming months. Deferred maintenance ultimately was reduced by several $100 million. This was in order to, one, balance the budget, but two, to save the COVID-19 block grant money that is a lot more flexible and can be used for any programs. That was under consideration of being cut, but ultimately that was saved in the final budget. And then the January proposal for student enrollment and retention was ultimately removed entirely in the final budget act. So the couple of policy changes that we had explained in May remain relatively unchanged. Categorical spending flexibility is still there for a couple of the programs, with a couple of caveats that there are some benchmarks that have to be met within the 5-year roadmap. The Chancellor's Office will be giving some instruction on how that audit or the benchmarks will have to be met, and then how that has to be reported on, and how they will keep a track on that. And then the expansion of the strong workforce program spending is also unchanged since May. So just a reminder of the legislative deadlines that have happened since our last meeting. In June, we reached our bill passage deadline for the first house, so all the assembly bills had to make it to the Senate and vice versa. We also reached that budget bill deadline in the middle of June. And then at the beginning of September, or end of August, beginning of September, we hit that point where all the bills had to clear that final appropriations threshold in the fiscal committees. This is where we saw the total bill count reduced from right around 2,000 bills down to maybe 1,000 remaining. So we basically cut the entire remaining legislative agenda in half. A couple of reasons why. Number one, we're still in a budget issue, budget shortfall, and revenue deficit. And because of this, the Appropriations Committee chairs were instructed that any bills that make it through their committee have to have either one of two things. It's got to be a leadership priority or a governor's priority, or it has to have an appropriation tied to it. If it has an appropriation tied to it, it has to have a funding source connected to that appropriation. So roughly 1,000 bills did not have a funding source identified, and they would have just drawn on the general fund. So those bills were immediately thrown into becoming a 2-year bill. So then finally at the bottom, the last thing that we have remaining is that October 14th deadline for the governor to either act on or veto any legislation that's still on his desk. So, a couple of bills that PCC had taken positions on back in May and June that I just want to, give a heads up and a status of where they are. AB 25, the expansion to the middle class scholarship and the expansion to the eligibility and how those students who currently qualify for middle class scholarships will remain in the program, as well as expand their eligibility going forward into future years. So this bill was held in the committee. However, it ultimately was included in the final budget act. And we expect to see more information on how that's going to be expanded in this coming 2024 budget. AB 247, the Almer and Suchi bond bill. Initially, there were two bonds, AB 247 and SB 28. The Senate bill version by Senator Glazer would have benefited the UC and the CSU systems a little bit more. We saw that as a little inequitable on a campus-by-campus basis. So ultimately, PCC took a support position on AB 247, would have given a little more money to each of the community college districts and community college campuses that need that funding, more so than focusing on CSU and UC. This bill was held as a 2-year bill. The primary reason is because leadership and the governor's office did not want this bond to show up on the March primary. If this bond had shown up on the March primary, because it is a Democrat incumbent in the presidency at this very moment, we would likely have a higher turnout of conservatives and GOP voters in the March primary. So because of that, we essentially were looking at a repeat of the defeat of Prop 13 from a couple of years ago, in which essentially the exact same amount of money for a K-14 bond was defeated by the voters. So we expect to see this come up, ideally passed by June or July, so it can make it onto the November ballot. Assembly Bill 368, this is the expansion of the College and Career Access Pathways program, as well as giving certain priority course enrollment for CCAP students and high school students that are part of the dual enrollment program. This bill was passed resoundingly by both houses and is still awaiting action by the governor. I haven't received our update from the governor's office, so I'm going to predicate all this on something may have been signed at some point today, but we just haven't gotten word of it yet. However, when any bills are signed or vetoed, we will provide an update to Alex and the board and superintendent. AB 506, I'm going to take a few minutes to explain this one a little more thoroughly. We took a support position at the beginning because of how this bill would have just extended the timeline of implementing the ethnic studies requirement at CSU by 1 year. A lot of the community college courses that are undergraduate requirement or GE breadth courses that meet this CSU requirement for students to transfer, a lot of those courses have not been approved yet by CSU. So this would have just given an extra year to get those courses approved. Ultimately, the bill was heavily amended to entirely recreate the approval process. It would have also required a re-review of existing approved courses, which PCC actually has. I think it's either the second or third highest number of courses that have been approved by CSU already. So that kind of would have thrown PCC a little bit back to square one of the approval process. This bill was held in committee and it has become a 2-year bill, though based on when the ethnic studies requirement takes effect at the CSU level, this bill may or may not be brought back up in the upcoming session. There may not be enough time for it. So we'll leave it at that. Ultimately, this bill was held and defeated for the rest of the year. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. AB 610, PCC had taken a support position. This was the Universal Student Transit Pass pilot program. This bill we heavily lobbied for and tried to work in tandem with the California Transportation Association and Transit Authority. At the end of the day, the CTA took a position of a bit of more of a neutrality on this just because they weren't willing to sacrifice their $5 billion budget ask to the governor's office. However, they have committed to try and work with us and the rest of the advocates to try and get something like this put in either into the budget or worked into their upcoming budget ask for the next year. AB 1096 by Mike Fong. This bill is currently sitting on the governor's desk awaiting action, and it ultimately allows and creates a permissive program to allow community colleges to offer courses in languages other than English. Not just foreign language courses, but say, for example, an auto shop course or an economics course or statistics course or anything like that. Any type of course can be offered in a language that's not English without requiring a student to concurrently enroll in an ESL course. This was sponsored by LA Community College District, and they ran their own pilot program, and the results of that came in about 113 additional FTES for one semester, and resulted in several $100,000 of additional apportionment gain through adding this FTES. So they saw some positives behind it. They ran this as a piece of legislation to allow every other college to basically do the same. AB70, the Economic and Workforce Development Program, this bill remained unchanged from May and June, the last time that we had discussed it. PCC had taken a support position, and it was held in committee, and it becomes a 2-year bill. What we've heard from the Chancellor's office is that they want a little bit more time to really work on, number one, getting a slightly better budget for next year to implement some of the base of it, but then also ensure that some of the industry needs are met, and the labor market concerns are addressed going forward. AB 1400 was also a support position by PCC, and it is currently awaiting governor's either signature or veto. However, this one has made it through with near unanimous support all the way through the legislature, and it essentially is going to provide an incentive for students to go and attend or finish a program at a historically black college or university out of state, but then return to California and work within California somewhere, or gain a further higher degree at a California college. So then finally, I wanted to just quickly address 2 bills that these were very last minute. We had to take action very quickly as they made it to the end of the legislative cycle. AB 689 is the community college enrollment and registration for incumbent healthcare workers. It's not that we saw this bill as doing something bad for healthcare workers or for the college's nursing programs. It would have required a certain quota of enrollment to be reserved for incumbent healthcare workers in nursing, in health sciences programs. The issue that we saw with this is that it set a precedent for requiring community colleges to establish a quota for a specific type of enrollment. Once we, and the league agreed with us on this, that once we set or allow the legislature to establish a quota enrollment system with the community colleges, it kind of snowballs from there that what's next in terms of the next quota that they want to set. So ultimately, PCC did a very good job of advocating for this bill to be held in the Appropriations Committee and be reworked into something that is less of a prescriptive and more of a permissive bill in this upcoming session. So we're looking forward to what the author's office is going to bring forward in terms of amendments. And then finally, AB 1699, PCC gave its go-ahead to the league to essentially lobby on its behalf to try and have this bill put on hold. It is currently sitting on the governor's desk, and much like the bill before, it kind of sets in an unnecessary precedence in terms of quota. Not quite enrollment quota, but in this sense, for this bill, it requires every open position to be opened up for first right of refusal for internal employees, whether or not they actually meet certain requirements, or whether or not there is somebody outside of the campus or district that is more qualified. The internal employees have that first right of refusal for the first 10 business days of that posting for that job. So we are still awaiting action by the governor on this one. And then finally, I wanted to leave the board and the subcommittee with a couple of things to think about over the next coming months. One thing to consider is a 2024 budget request or a legislative idea for the second year. Budget requests, just as a quick note below, should be less than $3 million. Generally, the Department of Finance will self-veto a statewide budget request. So if it's something that affects all colleges or all students on a statewide level, they will not take that up, and they will just allow that to be taken by the chancellor's office or the league. And then generally we want to try and stay away from any legislation that is considered controversial. It's really hard to find an author to run a controversial bill, but at the same time, we also don't want to give our district delegates anything that's going to make either them look bad or draw some ire from their colleagues and coworkers in the legislature. So that being said, I leave it to what the subcommittee and superintendent, what you guys have in terms of a budget idea. And I know that Alex and I are looking forward to really working on trying to get something either into the initial trailer bill or as a member request. But we want to try and find a way that the district can really plant itself within this upcoming budget to really benefit from ideally a slightly better budget than what we had last year. So with that, happy to take any questions or concerns.
Thank you, David. No, that was a really helpful overview. Is there any questions from committee members?
I was interested in something I saw, SB 330, about the pilot program for affordable housing for students for LACCD. It sounds really great. I wonder how Pasadena can get something like that.
That's definitely something that we could consider running as a piece of legislation. And if that's something that the subcommittee wants to go with, we can definitely start our initial outreach to the Department of Finance and just clear all of the initial hurdles to find out if they have any issues with it or if it's something that we can then take on to the legislature.
What is it exactly?
You're talking about SB 330, right?
Yes, SB 330 for LA Community College District to give them some resources to do a pilot program on housing for students. It's,
Out of curiosity, was this from a prior year?
I got it from the newspaper. Was it the wrong year?
I don't know if there's any money attached to it. It's allowing them to, is there any money connected to it?
It says allows the district to enter into agreements with nonprofit or private entities. So that doesn't sound like money. That sounds like approval to do something.
Which we can already do,
True,
technically.
but there might be mechanisms that make it easier or something. We can look into it, yeah.
Yeah, I think.
But
I think that might have been a design build authorization, like a permissive bill. And I can definitely get you guys some more information on that. I think I know which one you're talking about. It was from 1 or 2 years ago. And ultimately it was signed. I don't know if they would allow other districts to copy that yet, just because they don't have any data on how it has resulted yet.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Trustee Gibson. I think one thing I would love, either this is for Alex or David, but I think since I think we always use a refresher, and of course we have new committee members, how do we, with all these pieces of legislation, how do we end up taking a position on these pieces of legislation? And certainly I'm also curious about that shift in position on that Fong bill, like how did that come about in terms of our position on it?
sure, just traditionally and as history here, we will meet as the legislative year heats up and begin to understand what bills are out there and have a conversation about our priorities and where we want to be, and then end up with a set of bills that we will track as the year goes on. And those we take established positions on, and we kind of support that as the year goes on. As things heat up and as we get closer to deadlines, we are often put in a position by other agencies in the system, CCLC or whomever, to join in something or to take a position on something. And the Fong bill was an example of that. This question about classified employees and what rights they would have to a position was something that I think the CCLC came to us on and asked if we could lend our support. And at that point, when we've discussed this before with this committee, it's difficult to convene a committee meeting in the time it takes to get a response oriented. So in the past, the staff has had leeway from the committee to be able to take positions as needed to support something through something. And so that was the approach we took this time, was the CCLC was lining up people behind it, and we generally align the CCLC's interests in, so it made sense to pursue it in that regard.
I have a question about AB 299 from Holden. Do we know anything about that?
If you give me about 20 seconds, I'm just going to refresh my memory on it. Yeah, this bill regarding hazing at higher ed institutions, this was one that we kind of took a bit of a back seat to just because of the PR optics on taking opposition to an anti-hazing bill. And it relatively has more of an effect on UC and CSU campuses. So it's not, according to the chancellor's office when we had our conversation with them, it doesn't have as big of an effect on community colleges and wasn't really targeted at community colleges as much. This was more of a CSU, UC, and private institution thing.
Thank you.
We are still waiting to see what the action is from the governor's desk.
I think one thing that would be helpful that I know we had last year, I guess, academic year, or session year, session year probably is a better way to put this, for frame this, is we had, much like this PowerPoint, but we had like all the bills that we had taken a position on, and then kind of where it was by the end of the session year. I know this PowerPoint was basically it, David, but I think I would love to just have that and have the sense of.
I can circulate that.
That'd be great.
I get bill reports from David on a regular basis.
Great.
So I'll send you the most recent.
Perfect. Yeah, that'd be really helpful. Sure. And then I guess what also I think right now, obviously we're still waiting to see what the governor would do on certain bills, whether he's going to just become law or veto any of them. I think one thing that I guess we probably want to, and this will probably go to our meeting schedule conversation, is to figure out what the next year session will look like and how we want to approach that. But do you?
I was previously interested in supporting AB 610, but that was not
The transit
right.
bill? Yeah.
So seeing how we could support students' transportation this year would be a great goal, but I'd have to look up into it. That's something that I'd like to see this year.
In years past, this period right now that we're in, the session has ended, we're waiting for governor action, but the new budget year doesn't start till January. This period of 2.5 months or so has been a good time to do in-district meetings. And so we could try to, if there's something that comes up as a priority or that you want to have a conversation, this is when folks like Assemblymember Holden are going to be thinking about what they could be doing once the new year hits. And if they know that we're behind them and we'd be on transit again, we've followed his transit bill basically for the past 3 or 4 sessions. Yeah. So it wouldn't be out of place for us to take another meeting and say, let's try again, we're still with you, whatever you're thinking, and see where he thinks we could go. So we could try to get something lined up on that.
And we've supported this bill each time. And each time we've been up to Sacramento, I think we've said that, and he just laughs because he knows that we're supportive of it. Not in a great way, because it's something that obviously we want to see, and we know those benefits that we've been able to extend so far through the UPass. We want people to see more robustly. So.
Didn't it sound like one time it was very close, but then the community colleges got cut out?
There was some rewriting going on last year, I think, where they changed the definition of student in a way that wasn't helping us. I think we fixed that, but then there was a budget question at the governor's desk where he ended up vetoing it anyway. It's been a saga.
And there's a multi-pronged sort of effort that we can do related to this, because we can also go to the county,
Mm-hmm.
and we can also go to the city, or cities, right, related to, transit pass support. And I think that, Dr. Evalis was, having a conversation with the city of Pasadena, for example, on, increasing sort of our collaborations with the Department of Transportation for the city. And then we can also obviously go to Barker and Solis.
Absolutely.
I know that are they providing some support now for
The county?
the transit path,
Not as much, no. We carry a lot of the costs. The student activity fee ends up carrying a lot of the subsidized costs at this point.
Okay.
Although COVID mixed things up a bit, there was emergency dollars available for a while there. Yeah.
There is a county metro program, right?
Yeah.
I never really understood why, other campuses had access to that, and because there is a county metro program that's similar to what the program we have now, in terms of what it allows on at least the metro network. So I'm not sure what that program is versus.
I forget the details.
Yeah,
I'd
I
have
think
to
there was
refresh
something
memory.
there, but-
There are different versions of transit passes that
Right.
we've been engaged in from time to time.
Do you remember what
Is it the U-Pass?
The U-Pass.
That's what
we have.
we have that.
Yeah, so the UPass, it's just who pays for it,
Right.
essentially. So we at Cal State LA, Hilda Solis provided subsidies from her office for Cal State LA students.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's an ask that we can make. I don't know if that is still the case. I know it was the case pre-pandemic and also maybe during the pandemic, but I'm not sure.
Parker might have a different alignment on that too.
Yeah, could be.
I guess one thing that David also invited us and Allison mentioned, we should also think about, what other ideas or bills that we may want to support. I mean, this year obviously is our budget year, and recognizing that we did just pass the bonds, or recognizing that, but I also wonder, we've gone to the state before, I know, but if there are ways that we can maybe go to the state again for support in, our facilities plans that we have, and kind of where that thinking has been in the past, and what might be possible potentially down the line again.
I would have to find out, and I'm sure the facilities committee can do this
Right,
too,
of course.
because there is the formal application process to the state bond,
Yeah.
sequence to figure out where you get in line as far as that's concerned. And you can see what other projects are active on there. That's what made Serafian happen.
Right.
We were
Right,
in
right.
line for money there, and we might have other projects that have been submitted. I don't remember offhand what the details are.
So you're talking about the bond,
So that's separate.
separate, that's what you're talking about. But you're talking about the sort of $3 million and below sort of recommendation that he made, right?
Potentially, either, I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, whatever way.
But there's two avenues, right?
Mhm.
There's the potential statewide bond,
Correct.
which is similar to ours, but would be a statewide bond, right,
Mhm.
David?
Yes.
And then there's the kind of, this is
Discrete earmark
I-
appropriation.
earmark,
Yeah.
that's a good word.
Yeah.
Appropriation, I was gonna use a different term. But yes, there.
Direct support.
Yeah, direct
There you go,
support.
thank you.
Direct support, that's a good one.
Earmark just sounds nasty.
And we put a direct support request in.
I was gonna use something other than.
We had put a direct support request in through Senator Portuna's office previously.
That's right,
the
that's
previous cycle.
And that
it
never-
did not work out,
Yeah.
but I think we could certainly put
I
something together.
I think I would be interested, because I know that we had that conversation with the senator's office at the time, and
Mhm.
then he was supportive of it, and then it kind of faded, so I would love to kind of revisit that conversation and maybe see what other members that represent our district may be interested in potentially carrying that.
Sure. I appreciate the information, David, about the $3 million number. That's really helpful to have.
Yep. And I do apologize. I have to head off to my next
No
board
problem.
meeting for the night.
Thank you for joining us, David.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And on that note, do we
Yeah.
have anything else for item B1, update on state issues? Awesome. Then next is item C, meeting schedule. When do we think the next time? Obviously, we will need to meet you know, to determine what our positions for the next legislative session is, but.
I was gonna mention a date thing, but it doesn't necessarily affect this schedule. There is a CCLC meeting in November. It's just, I'm trying to think of that, you know, what.
You're talking about the convention, the Indian Wells?
Indian Wells, that, just thinking about where.
It's in November, not October?
November.
November, okay.
November
ACCT.
17th.
Okay, that's the one you're going. Oh, no.
I'm going to.
You're
I'm
going to
going.
ACCT?
No,
CCLC.
ACCT
Jump
is
over.
in Las Vegas in October, right?
You were gonna go, but you're not.
Different meeting. Are you going to Las Vegas?
I'm going in.
Awesome.
So yeah, I'm just thinking these dates, it doesn't really impact what we're doing. It's just when some of us will be together at certain times. And
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think maybe we can just offline doodle as we have in the past, and when needed to come together.
So Trustee Gibson, are you suggesting that we will learn a great deal about the legislative environment at the November conference, and that at some point after that, we should definitely have a meeting, so once we have that information, that statewide information, and digest that, then we can meet and see how we go forward and how we sort of fit into that.
yeah, it makes sense because the CCLC people will be there. There'll be people from the Chancellor's office there, so it makes sense that some information should be shared.
I encourage, forgive me for saying this, I think you do represent the entire board. If you speak to your colleagues and there are other issues that come up in their conversations, I think it's worth this body bringing it together to consider and think about going forward. But then that November date is a good tentpole, I think, to think about, to then come back afterwards and collect here to see if we want to do district meetings, if we want to bring anything up as potential legislation before the calendar starts afresh in January.
Then let's aim for after that. Hopefully, maybe we should check to see when CCSC will provide what they think about for the next coming year. Usually it's around that time when they do, if I remember correctly, but sometimes.
It might be in the new year, but I think we
Might
can
be in the
still
new
get a
year.
sense in November.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Maybe we can shoot that and we can figure out a date. Doodling. Cool. And then obviously in the new year, we should definitely have a meeting to solidify our positions on pieces of legislation or presidential directions that we're looking at. And then certainly in advance of a Sacramento lobby trip.
Correct.
Is alongside the CCLC legislative summit.
Generally speaking, the budget is released by January 10th, and then the conference is usually the last weekend of January. So that's sort of the hot window there to get together. And
That's right. So sometime in that window. Excellent. If nothing else on C, then we'll move to item D, proposed future agenda items. I know we mentioned a few things.
Yeah, I know. There was the talk about what we think we might try to propose as things that we could move forward, getting money for certain things, but I don't know how that fits on the agenda.
May I make a recommendation that at the next meeting, we come with some potential ideas that we can receive from the trustees, but also we as an institution can come to the board with, we obviously have significant needs, right? Obviously, within the parameters that David sort of suggested.
That's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Anything else for proposed future agenda items? Okay, then we want to E, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Sorry for the confusion with the two. I appreciate your grace.
No worries.
We're good to go off air.
Technology is.
We are off air. Would definitely, also would love that, the bill.
Yes, absolutely.
Update thing, because